Hey everybody, Leslie Gray here. Welcome to the Chronicles of Les Mo podcast. Today we sit down with Anna Woods. Now Anna is a certified trauma-informed life and grief coach. And this conversation comes at a great time, especially now it's Mental Health Awareness Month. Now, Anna shares her journey through her own grief, to her love for God, through her career and college life, and I call her a Renaissance woman. So it's an interesting conversation. I encourage you to sit and watch the whole thing. And with that, here we go. Hey, Anna.
Hey, Les.
Welcome to the Chronicles of Les Mo.
Why, thank you. I'm excited to be here with you guys.
I really appreciate you coming to sit with us.
No problem. Glad to share.
Good. So you know the formula, right? We try to, have conversations with people we love and are interesting and asking them to just kind of like share their story in sort of like a timeline.
Okay. Right.
So, but before we, really get started, I wanted you to share a little bit about yourself. How do you describe yourself? I guess it's a good question.
Well, I am, of course, a wife, a mother, and a woman of faith.
Mm-hmm.
And I would probably describe myself as curious, transparent. And I believe I have a sense of humor that most people don't see. Because I'm serious and focused and intentional with my time and what I do. So that brings about a bit of seriousness. So there is a sense of humor there.
Well, that's always good. Yeah. That's always good, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think I wanted to start with a little bit about the most recent successful thing to celebrate in your life right now. And recently,
I had a birthday.
You had a birthday? Well, that's one. I was thinking about the degree.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Well, I've always wanted a master's in advanced education. Mm-hmm. And based on this journey, which I'm sure we'll talk about a little further into this, at this time in my life, the master's in ministry just made perfect sense for where God has me or had me at that stage. And so it was exciting. It was challenging.
Now, how long did it take to the whole
year and a half?
18-month program?
18-month program.
Yeah. And the school?
Warner University. It's a small Christian university just west of here.
Gotcha. Yeah. All online?
All online.
Yeah. That self-study can be tough, right?
Discipline. It requires discipline. And a master's program, as you know, lots of writing, lots of projects. Yeah. And so, but very enjoyable. It was an opportunity to apply all of my corporate experience into what it means in the biblical text, and then take my life and put it on a microscope.
Yeah.
And look at it very differently from what I have really been taught. And so all of that has been quite a journey for me.
So me and you, I'm going to talk about your career a little bit, but I'm going to set it up a little bit.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
So me, when I joined the church, we had some of a history before I joined the church through Mo.
Correct.
But when I joined the church, Darren and I became fast friends.
Correct.
But that's when you left your job at what's this?
Albertsons.
Albertsons.
That's
left
correct.
your job.
That's correct.
And I didn't know, but I said, "Hey, Darren, I know your Anna is left. If she wants to maybe get another job or something, then I know this guy at TG Lee who might be there, right?"
Yes, I remember that. Yes.
And I didn't know your position. I didn't know your career or anything like that. I just said, well, let me just see if I can help a brother out or something like that, not knowing everything. Darren thought that was cool, but that's how we became fast friends. But I wanted you to share a little bit about your career.
So I started with Albertsons in an entry level position at a very young age. And my parents have always taught, you want something, you got to work for it.
Right,
You know,
right.
hard work will yield rewards.
Mm-hmm.
And so I stuck with it. Albertsons actually moved me here to Orlando.
Mm-hmm.
I went on a fast track leadership program
Mm-hmm.
and landed my first position as a what we would call store director
Okay.
in Bay Hill, which is in Dr. Phillips.
Right.
And from there, I managed or was store director of several different stores on that track. And at the end of my career, I had 22 stores that I led from here to Pensacola. So I did a lot of traveling.
So imagine me coming along saying, "Hey, does your wife need a job?" I felt so foolish after I found out your level.
Well, I will say that in that career, most people, when you tell them you work for Albertsons or for a grocery store, I'm not sure why, but they naturally think you're a cashier or department manager.
Believe me,
Or
my apologies. If I haven't apologized already, I'm apologizing now.
no worries, no worries. Ultimately, Albertsons paid for my first degree.
Right.
Yeah. They were the source and the foundation of finance. My first degree.
And your first degree is
in organizational leadership.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Yes.
And where'd you get that from?
Same place.
Same place.
Same place.
Okay. All right.
But not online.
Not online.
I had to go to class. That was back in the day. I had to go to class.
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
So you left there and decided to take a break for a little while?
Well, Albertsons divest almost all their stores
right.
here.
They didn't. You didn't leave.
I didn't leave. No, I did not.
Right.
I was offered to transfer to a couple different states, but we elected to remain here in Florida. And so that meant that, I would be without a job ultimately.
Right.
I was one of the last of the leadership to be laid off at that time or given severance.
Right.
And so I took a year off thinking that I was ready to retire, but I quickly discovered that at that age with so much to give to the world, I thought I needed to be active again. So I took a position at Goodwill.
Right.
I was the senior director of retail operations for about 3.5, 4 years.
Do you think people have an understanding of what that even means? Or
No.
Like the supermarket? So what does that mean?
To be
a regional director.
It means that I'm responsible for all the retail operations in Central Florida, including at that time the donation centers. I had a staff of 6 or 7 that reported to me that actually oversaw the retail operation. I'm responsible for P&L, the profit and loss statement, making sure that the stores were compliant. It really encompassed all facets of business and a lot of HR because it gets into compliance.
Yeah.
And so that was my responsibility for about 4 years.
I tell you, it was when I think me and Darren were working together during that time when you told me. I was like, man, that sounds like a heavy job.
Yeah, a lot of stress, but in all of life journey, there's so much that you can glean from the experiences.
Yeah.
And so I did retire from Goodwill, and as you know, Darren runs Provet Groups, and so I am 49% ownership of Provets Group Inc. And so he's always been an entrepreneur, which means that my father was an entrepreneur, and so I do have a little bit of that in my spirit myself. So I support him today as well as the coaching that I do.
So we never really retired.
No, I don't think you ever really retire. You just are drawn to what's in your heart.
Yeah. I mean, we talk about it. It's service.
It's service.
It's some form of service. Yeah. You're adhering to God's calling in some way or another. And so that's a good segue point. And my question is, when did you first fall in love with Jesus?
That is such a great question. I think falling in love with Jesus is a continuous journey. And I think at every stage of my life, my love for Jesus has deepened. right?
Yeah.
So I was baptized at a young age,
Mm-hmm.
and at that time, I'm sure I had no idea what John 3:16 meant. For
Right.
God so loved the world, He gave His only begotten Son.
Mm-hmm.
And so at this age, my father used to say, "You got to know God for yourself. You have to know
Right.
Jesus for yourself."
Right.
So I now understand and can comprehend what John 3:16 means, and I know Jesus for myself in a very intimate way.
Right.
And so I do believe that this last 15 years or so of my journey has
Mm-hmm.
been about how to know Jesus for yourself
Mm-hmm.
and grow a most intimate relationship with Christ.
Yeah.
And so, so I've known Him all of my life, but I know Him more intimately today than I ever have before.
Yeah.
So, but it's a journey.
Do you think along the along your journey that there was a moment where you can identify that was kind of like a transition from, like almost a inflection in your relationship with him? The way that I put the question before is like, was there a certain behavior that wasn't quite Christ-like, and then after a certain point, you were like, man, he is transforming.
Of course, of
Mm-hmm.
course. I think those moments come all of our lives, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think the critical point was, you may or may not know, when I had my last child, it was a near death experience.
No, I don't.
Yeah, and I think now that's part of what drives my passion for maternal health.
Yeah.
But I nearly hemorrhaged to death, and now I know that is the top 3 leading causes of death in maternal health.
Right.
And so, in that instant, as I lie after delivery, with the doctors not really understanding why I was hemorrhaging in the way that I was, my husband called my parents and my pastor, then her pastor, really, at Macedonia in Melbourne.
Mm-hmm.
My oldest daughter was actually present. She'll graduate next month as a nurse midwife, and I believe all of this is connected.
Yeah.
And so, as I lied there with the doctors not really understanding what was happening, and prayer was happening in the atmosphere, right?
Right.
The spiritual war was on
Right.
for my life,
Right.
right? For
Right.
this bleeding to stop, that no one could tell what was happening.
Right.
And so I went to have a full body scan, and the bleeding stopped.
Wow.
And so
And I didn't know
that actually still makes me emotional, because it is in that moment that you realize that God is real.
Mm-hmm.
There's a higher power always operating,
Mm-hmm.
and that prayer changes things.
Yes, it does. Yes,
And
it
so, it altered the way that I live my life, right? I cherish the moments that I have, and I just want to be a better human being, right?
That's awesome.
I just want to be a more compassionate human being. And I think when we have these near-death experiences, for those who've had those, this was actually my second, it changes your life.
Yeah.
It changes how you see life.
Right.
So yeah, there are those moments.
It's we both know Pastor Thomas from Antioch.
Yes.
And he used to go out, take the bus intentionally and kind of just minister to people on the bus and have an impact. But he and I used to have discussions about the proof of God, right? And and part of the conversation I remember is that this is how we know God exists.
Yeah.
What He does
Yes.
to us.
Yes.
Not that I need to see the ocean depart,
Right.
split or anything like that, but the impact He has on us, that is a material and visible change in our life.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
proof.
It's proof.
That He exists.
Yes.
And that sounds like one of those stories.
Well, absolutely.
That sounds like one of those moments.
Absolutely.
And that's awesome. And I know it's, it's driven all of the things that's come
Yes.
after.
Yes. And that was 25 years ago.
Right.
A little over 25 years ago.
So I'm going to jump forward though, right? Because after Goodwill, You still work. You're still doing work for ProVets, of course, as needed.
Yes, as needed.
But then you went on another journey.
I did. I just look at life as a continuous journey, right? And that we have to be open and curious to what God puts in our path.
Yeah.
And so at the Goodwill, my mother died shortly after that. And that was another critical moment in my life. Very, it's hard to put words to it even today, but it changed how I viewed life, but it also changed how I view death.
Gotcha.
Right. But I needed to, for me, I needed to understand emotionally what was happening. So when my mother died, I felt as if the world was moving, but I was standing still, frozen in this moment of pain.
Right.
And so I, being the curious person I am, I wanted to understand more about the emotions of grief.
Gotcha.
You know, what is this thing called grief? And why do I feel this way? And why is it just hanging over my body?
Right.
And so I've done a few things, right? I did yoga for a while and meditation for a while.
To try to
address the stress and anxiety that I felt in my body.
Right.
You know, and what I know now is that we carry grief in our body. Grief is a living emotion, right?
It's kind of visibly seen in
it's
in the way our body
it
reacts.
can be visibly seen, but it certainly is physically felt.
Gotcha.
Right?
Gotcha.
And it can impact your health, your mental wellness.
Right.
It could lead to anxiety, heart disease, high cholesterol, you name it, right?
Yeah.
When we suppress the emotions of grief, right? And so I wanted to understand what the emotions of grief was all about, right? How can I move through this, right? So I participated in Grief Share at Antioch. And I actually became a part of that leadership team for Grief Share once it was started. I completed that. I actually facilitated some classes for a short period of time. But I still felt something's still missing.
Gotcha.
Something's still not right.
Yeah.
So I went on a search for a educational base program. And I found the grief recovery method, which is actually educational based, but is also evidence based.
Okay.
And so I had to work through my own garbage first, because what I discovered is that my grief was not just about my mother's death. My grief was about a lifetime of loss that had gone unprocessed, that was just stuck, right? You know, how we push things aside, push them down, and they're having an emotional impact on us, and we don't acknowledge it.
Yeah.
We just kind of keep moving through life.
Yeah.
And so so I had to work through that for myself. So I did an intense 4-day class.
Yeah.
And at the end of that 4-day class, I became a certified grief recovery specialist.
Okay.
So that was my first stop. From there, I gained a certification as a life coach. Because in this journey, I don't want to do harm, right? You want to understand and be able to articulate and help people without doing more harm. And that was important.
So you went through the class, but when you started the class, was that the intent to coach or do for other people, or just find
the grief recovery class, the initial intent was to help myself.
Help yourself,
right?
Yeah.
Unless we're straight.
Yeah.
It's kind of hard to support someone else, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So I needed to deal with me first, right?
Mm-hmm.
I need to understand my emotions and what was happening with me and how I moved through the grief that I was experiencing.
Right.
So the initial intent was to help me, right? And in return, I'm able to help others.
Yeah.
And so that's where the life coaching came in.
Yeah.
And I recently also finished a certification through Florida State University as a trauma-informed coach.
Yeah.
So I'm now a trauma-informed life and grief coach with a master's in ministry.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, some would say Renaissance
Oh,
woman,
well.
right? I know the journey is the journey,
The
right?
journey, yeah,
It's continuous,
it's continuous.
but it's definitely impressive.
Yeah.
So you've had a chance to help a number of people along the way.
I have, I have private clients.
Mm-hmm.
I don't do much private grief coaching anymore, but I do public speaking
Yeah.
workshops.
Right.
I've hosted some community talks at Canterbury Retreat here
Okay.
in Oviedo, where people can just come in and just kind of get a glimpse of what grief recovery is all about.
Yeah.
And I have this personal motto that if I just reach one, then I've done what I've been sent to do.
Yeah.
So each time I speak, I reach one.
Right.
And then from that one, there's another one. So,
Yes.
My last speaking engagement was in Tallahassee a couple weeks ago. It was called Healing Mother Wounds.
Okay.
It's a grassroots organization. Shout out to them.
Shout out. Okay.
They're doing great work. It was their first inaugural workshop, but I reached one that called me yesterday.
Okay.
And I'll appear on that show coming up here in the next couple months. So
I feel like God does that for some of us, right? Because
Yes.
He'll leave the sheep and go after the one, right?
Yes.
So
yes,
that's
yes,
awesome.
just
That's
one.
awesome.
Just
So, do you think that this part of this journey in your life is God's way of I don't know how to put this, right? So God uses us to accomplish His will in so many different ways, and I've seen some of your classes, I've taken pictures at them and everything, and it's very emotional. But there's a lot of hurting people out there,
Oh yeah.
and this thing about being stuck or grief and what we think we know
Right.
about it
Right.
and what you have learned
Right.
has really kind of bridged the gap through some of our discussions. The just for completeness, how would one I know it's probably hard for somebody to self-diagnose,
Right.
but are there some common things that an individual could kind of hear and say, maybe that's me, and
Well-
I might need some help or counseling?
Yeah, I think the first and the most important thing is that when I was able to have a working definition of what grief is,
Yeah.
then I was able to unpack my own grief.
Mm-hmm.
So let's start with what the definition of grief is.
Can we compare that to what we all think grief is?
You could, when I give you the definition,
Sure.
I want
Okay.
you to think about it
Okay.
and respond accordingly.
Okay.
And you maybe identify some things in your own life
Yeah.
that you didn't recognize as grief, right?
Okay, that's fair. Yeah.
So grief is a normal and natural response to significant loss of any kind,
Of any kind. Yeah.
Not just death,
Right.
not just divorce,
Right.
right? Can you think of anything that you would call grief in your own life
For me,
based on that definition?
yeah. I mean, well, of course, my mom was passing, but not just that. I would say, I know when I lost my career, or I got downsized about 10 years ago, and I think that there was a period of sadness that I couldn't
Couldn't shake.
shake.
That's
Yeah.
grief. So let me before we go any further, there's two things you said that I want to
Sure.
just touch on because we do it all the time,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
I've done it for years.
Right.
When your mother passed, what does that mean? Did she die? Was it death?
At the time, yeah.
So the word passing you're using for death,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So what does passing mean?
In my mind, it just, we use the word to mean that they're not alive anymore. They've
Right.
gone to heaven or somewhere, if I'm a believer spiritually, or they transitioned.
Yeah. So we struggle
Yeah.
with using the word
Yeah.
death.
Yeah. Yeah.
And dying.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
They pass.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I lost
Yeah.
my mother, or I lost my father, or I lost my job. It could be the death of your job, but it
Yeah.
also can bring new life,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So terminology really does matter.
Yeah, I would say that the feel, even trying to answer that question is kind of like battling the learned terminology of these things, and and really calling it what it is
Yes.
hard.
It's hard. It's very hard.
So,
very hard.
I know that me and my sisters, I know that we still struggle with remembering the folks that have passed in our lives with fondness versus sadness.
Right.
Right. And
Yeah, but you know what? The thing with grief is that fondness, joy, and sadness can all coexist.
Yeah.
And it's fine.
Yeah.
Remember, the definition is a normal and natural response. So your normal and natural response for you is sadness and joy.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Yeah. That's good.
We're all uniquely created who we are. So we're going to have the emotional response to grief in very different ways. And there's no right or wrong way to grieve. Right?
Because I naturally we might feel guilty about feeling the way we feel, right?
Right.
Or somebody might come along and say, "Get over it,"
Yeah, and that's not helpful either.
That's not.
And the G word I call guilt, right, implies that we have the intent to harm. And I don't believe that applies when we talk about how we feel emotionally about those that we love that are no longer with us.
That's good.
But, therein lies the journey, right? It's because I was stuck in grief and grieving because there's so many myths and misinformation, A, about what grief is, and B, about how we should grieve, right? What's right or wrong, right? What's the etiquette for grieving? Well, there isn't any.
Right.
That's what I know now.
Yeah.
There's no etiquette. There's no right or wrong. Grief never ends.
Yeah.
Does it get lighter with time? Yes, but that requires hard work, right?
Yeah.
So, that's part of why I felt my journey was so necessary, so that I understand grief from that perspective, right? And so the evidence-based work, it works, right? And so one of the things that that was really important to me as I continued this journey as a woman of faith is to ask myself, who was Jesus as a human, right? Emotionally.
Yeah.
Who was he? And so I went on this search, this biblical search, right?
Right.
And so I have a few notes here.
Sure.
So here's what I want to share.
Okay.
So Jesus wept in John 35 and 37 at the death of Lazarus.
Yep.
Right? In that moment, he showed compassion and love, right? He showed love in John 3:16. He showed love in John 13:34 through 36. But you see him showing love all throughout the Bible, right?
Yeah.
In Matthew 21:12 and 13, he turned over the tables at the temple gate. He was angry.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
We're talking about human emotions that Jesus displayed.
Yeah.
So he felt sadness. He lamented over Jerusalem in Matthew 23 and 37. He was disappointed in Matthew 26 and 40.
Yep.
He was betrayed in Matthew 26 and 50.
Yeah.
He suffered, right? We just celebrated resurrection, but he suffered in Luke 22, 39 and 40, and he felt joy in John 15, 11. My point here is that most of us ignore our human emotions because we're believers, right?
Yeah.
We should just pray about it.
Yeah.
And we're told that,
We're
right?
told that, yeah.
However, when you read the scripture, Jesus was human. He came as human, but he was divine, right? I don't want to misunderstand that.
Right.
Came as a human, but he was divine. He was sent, right? He also displayed every human emotion that every one of us have.
Yeah.
So why can't we?
Even fear, right?
Even fear. So
knowing who he is and where he's going and what's going to happen, he still was afraid.
He still was afraid. He knew he was going to raise Lazarus from the dead, but he still was filled with sadness.
Yeah.
He wept. So why do we suppress our tears? Why do we suppress our own emotions?
Man, it's conditioning.
Yes.
Of the conditioning of the world.
Yes.
And we know that we know where that's from. So.
Yes. So when I was able to, and this has been part of my journey, right? When I was able to wrap my mind, my soul around the fact that Jesus wept, he came as a human. I too am a human. And how does that relate to us right now?
Yeah.
In this climate of so much stress and anxiety,
Oh, yeah,
right?
yeah.
How does that relate to us? It tells me that we can be human.
Yeah.
We can weep. We can feel sad. We can be disappointed, but we have to pick ourselves up,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
We have to keep moving. We have to learn from those experiences.
Yeah.
And so that's why the evidence-based program was so important for me,
Yeah.
is that it's based on the facts, right?
Yeah.
It's
That's huge. I think that, we've talked about this from time to time, but I know it's helped me in the past. I haven't taken your class or anything, but I mean, but our conversations I've had, from time to time has had a lot of impact, and I've shared these things along the way as best as I've been able to.
right.
But so man, it just always leaves me thinking.
Yes.
I appreciate that. Got me on camera like, wow.
That is the job of a coach.
Yes.
Is to leave their client thinking, right, and going deeper.
Yeah.
Because I am intentional in what I do.
Yeah.
And the goal is to have you go deeper and find purpose.
Yeah.
In life challenges that creates a sense of joy for yourself, right?
Yeah, look at me, I'm getting, sometimes these eyes leak because of the lights.
If that's your story, I would tell you to just let it flow, right?
Yeah,
I would tell you that if you feel the need to weep, then allow that human emotion of sadness to come forth, because it's cleansing.
It definitely comes out from time to time. Mo recently retired, and sometimes she'll have a good day, and sometimes it's not so good. But I often talked about that being part of that loss.
Yes.
Thing that you mentioned from time to time, like even her dad selling his house.
Yeah, so
things like that.
So let's talk about those real. So those are real losses that we all experience,
and that we might find is common to man, and not really. Why are you getting so emotional about that? That kind of stuff.
And instead of why are you getting so emotional about that, just sit with the person and allow them to get emotional about it, right? That's part of processing that. So Mo retirement is, yes, that's grief. That is a reaction to a significant change in her life, right? Your father moving, that's grief. Relocation is grief. Selling his house that he's lived in for years, that's grief, right?
Yep.
So all of these things that we experience all of our lives that we don't associate with grief, it's grief.
So I know, is there any, without sharing too much information, is there any one particular example that you can say before this person was this before the grief counseling and after?
Sure. There are some testimonials on my website that are public testimonials, but I will use Janae Lewis because it was probably the client that has had the most impact on me.
Okay.
Right. It's that when she came to grief recovery, she initially thought it wasn't for her.
Right.
Right. Because she thought grief was just about death.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so after 2 weeks or so, what she realized is that it was not just about death, and she indeed needed to be in the class. She had extreme, she talks about her anxiety and stress and the pain in her chest that she felt that she just didn't know where it was coming from. Well, the grief recovery method helps you to walk back in your life, not stay there.
Right.
But you got to go back there. So you begin to unravel some of the things that have happened in your life that renders you in the state that you find yourself in.
Right.
And so Janae and her husband had tried for years to have a child. And so about, I think, 6 weeks into grief recovery, Janae was really quite resistant at times. You're coming to class.
Right.
But about 6 weeks in, just before she completed, it's a 7-week course, she found out that she was pregnant.
Wow.
Yeah. And so they were finally able to have a baby. I think the baby's 3 now and doing great. But she herself attributed that to the fact that she was carrying so much grief and so much anxiety and so much stress. And we know that grief, it will lock your body down, right?
Yeah.
It's heavy.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean,
so so whatever is affecting you mentally affects you physically.
Yeah.
And so her grief had really taken a toll on her life.
Right.
And so so she would be one of those folks that I would say have made tremendous stride. But know that grief is a journey, right? There's no one size fit all. There's no one thing cure all. It's working through your own individual grief.
Right.
So sometimes what worked for one person doesn't necessarily work for another because we're all different.
Right. If I had to I want to put a link just because I think this conversation and subject is very important, but I want to put a link in the video to somewhere where people can find out information if this resonates with them.
Sure. It's al-woods.com.
Okay.
It's my website, and I'm on all the social media platforms at ALW Coaching, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook. I can be found any of those places. And from my website, there is a couple free download journals that a person can download. And so, anytime. And then my email address is also, they can just contact me through my website if they chose to. But my main focus really is on workshops and speaking engagements, and I take limited clients, individual clients.
Well, that's a good segue point.
Okay.
So I think that, I see, so on your social media personal side, I see you guys doing a lot of travel.
Yes.
Yeah. So is this part of the balance of retirement and not being retired kind of lifestyle now?
Yeah, I would say it's more of retirement and balancing, still giving back to others.
Yeah.
And still being engaged in a way that's healthy at our age.
Yeah.
I think at every age, we should remain engaged somehow with what our passion is. And so, traveling it's a passion, and we thoroughly enjoy it. We just got back from Africa.
I was going to ask you.
Yes.
So tell me a little bit about that trip.
Oh man, Africa is incredible. I am not sure what my expectations were, if I had any. Darren had been 2 or 3 times prior. It was my first trip. And I had not really had the desire to go to Africa, but last year it dropped in my spirit. It's time to go.
Yeah.
And so
I don't know. Did you feel like you were returning home to some degree?
Some degree.
Because when we went to Namibia with Gracia and those guys, I think it was 16, they kept saying, welcome home.
Yeah.
And which was kind of like emotional too. It was like, wow. I mean, because like you, when I went, I didn't really have any expectations, but I came back feeling like that.
Yeah, I think I came back feeling like, wow, we as Black Americans have no idea. So we went to Johannesburg and surrounding areas, and then we went to Cape Town and surrounding areas. We did all the usual, Nelson Mandela Museum and those things of that nature. But we're coffee lovers, and so we like to engage with the community as best we can and as safely as we can. So we did a couple local coffee shops and had an opportunity to sit with 2 young people. One is a jeweler and one is a guitarist. And I'm probably going to get his name wrong. I believe it pronounced Islam the guitarist. He's on Instagram, both young. One is a Black South African, and the other one is white. She is a variety of cultures and nationality. And so I think it behooves us when we travel to other countries, if we're really going to understand the beat of the country, we have to engage with locals.
I agree.
And so everywhere we go, we try to engage with locals. So we made contact with at least 6 to 8 people that were local.
Yeah.
And we actually had lunch with the young couple.
Right.
And to understand the dialect and how the tribes migrated and separated, and to understand there was only 3 or 4, if my memory serves me correct, tribes, and from that, all tribes came, and thousands of languages across the continent.
Wow.
Right.
Yeah. So
yeah, interesting trip.
Yeah.
I would definitely go back.
So we kind of scratched it off our bucket list, but I think it's going to have to go back on before, because we've seen Namibia, we've seen Johannesburg down to South Africa, but there's a whole another aspect up there that I would love to adventure at some point. So as we move forward, right? Let me see. I think I talked about your career. I talked about the where you are on your journey right now in terms of the grief recovery. Your travel. What we also like to talk about is creative side of people. I mean, art, or in that, do you have a creative outlet, would you say?
I guess I do. I mean, I think marketing is creative, right? I do all my social media stuff, good, bad, or indifferent. I, created my own logo, which is my initials. And I just try to keep it simple and straightforward and easy to understand. So not a whole lot of creativity in the way of what we view today as creative.
Well, I think there's, I follow you, so I see your pictures, as a photographer, I see the way you I see what you see, right? So that's how sometimes we look at it, is like the camera sees what we see, and sometimes it shows you what you don't see.
That's interesting.
Right? So when we look through the lens, our naked eye may see a scene one way, but through the lens, it looks very different. So I see the pictures that you take of the landscape where you're going. And so I was, wanting to understand the impact of all these landscapes that you and Darren have been exposed to over these last, Africa was the recent trip, but before that, it was something
it's
else.
just incredible. It's Switzerland. It's all over Europe. It's, the islands. It's Canada. It's everywhere we travel. And so I think my eye and the camera has a relationship with nature. And the way that I view life is through the lens of nature, right? I often tell the story of a rose bush that my mother had in the front yard, and how she would prune this rose bush every year around springtime. And I used to think as a child, she's going to kill that rose bush for sure.
Right.
But every year her rose bush came back more brilliant than the year before, right? And so my love with nature, I think, began as a child. And sometimes we disconnect our love for things, whatever that is that's in your heart. And it surfaced as I've aged. And so I think my love for landscape comes from the fact that both my parents are from the country, rural Alabama.
Right.
They both grew up on farms.
Right.
I spent most of my summers on the farm, at one grandparent's house or another. So I think in us, historically, who we are merges when we become more authentically who we were created to be.
Yeah.
So I feel like I'm more in that state of being, and that's the journey that I've been on, is cleansing out the stuff that don't serve my mind, body, or soul well. And so what comes from that is the ability to see beyond the vision of the eye, right? And the camera often will capture what's in the heart.
That's why I love it so much, girl. It brings,
So interesting you would ask that question, because I had not really thought about, but I take a lot of pictures and a lot of video clips. I capture a lot of special moments. So
well, I think the marketing ties in. If I can share my thoughts, is that I see you incorporate your travel into your marketing.
Yes.
And I've watched it transition from, say, a template on Canva to something that is more personalized and reflective of what you're trying to say. And I think it's over the years, it's certainly resonated with your.
Yeah, I think the challenge is how to integrate, how I integrate who I am, truly who I am, into the work that I do at this stage. Yeah. Sometimes it's a little challenging to know where the where the line is. Yeah, because
so speaking of that, I mean, I know if anybody doesn't know, we know. Are you still serving as a deaconess?
I am not.
You're not. Okay.
I am not. I recently joined and will serve as part of the Sunday school.
Oh, okay.
At Antioch. But that's another great question, because I think there comes a time in our walk, if we listen closely to the direction that God is leading us. I clearly heard him say some years ago, you need to go another way, right? I was studying the scripture where they were taking gifts to the baby Jesus, and there was danger in the way that that brought the gifts in.
Yeah.
I'm paraphrasing.
Yeah.
And he warned them not to go back the same way.
Right.
Right. And so as that resonated with me, I heard you need to go another way.
Right.
The way you're going is not working. It's not effective.
Right.
And so all of this was happening at the same time as the life coach and my mother dying. And so all of these things were happening at the same time. And so now I the direction that I go, it places me around people and places that I would never have gone before.
Right.
Right. Speaking to people that I would never have been exposed to before. So I think it just have broadened my bandwidth to touch people outside of the physical building of the church.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I love Antioch. I will always be at Antioch. And I think once you accept the calling as a deacon or deaconess, it's always the calling, right?
Right.
It doesn't mean that you're not serving. It just means you're serving in a different way.
Yeah.
So,
Larry said that.
we serve in a different way.
Yeah.
And quite frankly, all of our service should look a little different, because we're all different, right? The root of it is still our love for Christ. But how we serve really is different.
Yeah.
And he speaks to us differently through our intimacy with him.
Yeah, he's using us according to his will.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
I think that's Romans 8:28 or something. I don't know.
Well, I'm not one of those who can say it's from, which is why I had to read that scripture from my phone, right?
I got you.
I had to come to grips with that too, right? He doesn't give it to us all the same way, right?
No.
You take Larry can quote.
Larry will quote you in
from
a minute.
Here to there.
Yeah,
that's not my gift.
That's right.
And so I try to stay in my lane. It works better that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's see. We got career.
Yep.
We got God. I think your salvation story, your creativity, and your career now. I'll say, for lack of a better word.
For lack of a better word. Yeah.
And so what's next?
I don't know.
Awesome answer.
I don't know. I flow with the Spirit.
Yeah.
And where he leads, I follow.
Yeah.
And so I operate on this just reach one. And so as I reach one, that's what's next. So I never really know what's next, because I never really know who I'm going to reach, right?
Pastor Thomas said that to me one day. Sometimes it's just important to be available for what's next.
Yes.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Without all this pre-planning.
That's right.
Yeah, we can plan all we want.
Yeah.
But we know what the word says.
God directs our steps. I know that one. Proverbs 16:9.
Yeah. So I like to say I just flow with it. I'm the girl that likes to take her shoes off and walk on the grass barefooted in the backyard, right?
Nice, yeah.
I go out in the backyard, and I have 30 orchids that listen, and they don't talk back. So I enjoy hobbies, right? I love to walk. I walk 4 times a week, and Saturdays I walk with a group that's called Black Girls Run. The Oviedo Oviedo flock is what we're called. So I'll do that in the morning. So I just kind of flow with life.
I love
life
it.
is good.
I love
life
it.
is good.
And thanks for coming and sitting with me.
Thank you for having me.
I appreciate it. Oh, before but is there anything that I need to share or you want me to share on here, or are we okay?
I think we're okay. You know
Okay.
what? You know what I will share, and I think this also is part of the journey is that Darren and I, we have collectively 4 children and 2 grandchildren, and so we're a blended family,
Yeah.
right? And so we work very hard at knitting our blended family together in a way that represents love and compassion and all of their differences, right? Because we're all different. All the children are different. We have 2 grandkids. And so I think it's important that there's so many blended families out there to know that love supersedes everything, every conflict that ever comes up.
Right.
And the compassion that you show for your children, whether they're your biological children or not, that love and compassion is the knit that brings the family together.
Awesome.
And so that's really important. So thank you for allowing me to share that bit
You're welcome.
of information. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.